hereby opening Women in Numismatics meeting. First order of business, parliamentary procedure is out the window because we are on a time restraint in this room. There's a few things that I do need to get across. This is our first West Coast meeting in many, many years, and it is the beginning of one of many. We have been fortunate that the people at Expos Unlimited are giving WIN the opportunity to have a West Coast board meeting in February at the Long Beach show for whenever, until we don't want it anymore. And this will be an ongoing process, and I'm very happy about that for our West Coast people. It will be every February at Long Beach. Next order of business, and not to be brief about it, but I must. There has been a supporter of WIN for many years who has always reached into his pocket to help us along with the refreshments and anything that we've needed. I would like to take this opportunity to recognize his generosity and support by presenting him a certificate of appreciation. Arthur Fitz.
I wish you'd approached me for this year, too.
Thank you.
We arrived and it's already been eaten.
Well, not this time. For those in the past, we truly appreciated WIN members, board members, and me personally. Thank you, Art.
Here's my pledge for next year.
All right. Before I turn over the floor, yes?
Don't forget to call in from Los Angeles.
I'm sorry?
Don't forget to call in for coffee for Los Angeles.
Yes.
Well, okay.
I'll be in touch.
Good.
I didn't have time here. I didn't have time. Don't worry about it.
Normally, we go around the room, everybody introduces themselves and such, but we can't do this today, and for that, I'm sorry.
Okay, I don't think we need much introduction. We all know and love Walter Ostromecki, but I'd like to do a brief introduction to him. He's a current A&A Board of Governor.
Correct.
And he is also a silent lover of Joan Jett and rock and roll. And he can explain that to you later. But anyway, he's here to talk to us today. His topic, coincidentally, is called WIN, Women in Numismatics. I'd like to introduce Walt Ostromecki.
Thank you. For those that were at fun, such as Cindy Grellman and others that are here, I may put you through this a second time, but I hope you'll find the second round as interesting as the first. Your organization is called WIN, and what a better topic than Women in Numismatics. By the way, Lorraine, when was this club founded? When was the organization founded? Do you know?
The organization was founded in 1991. It was founded and established in the state of New Jersey. It was registered there, but the founders were from all over.
So, from that little bit, one would gather that women have only been around a short time in numismatics. Well, this morning, I'm going to readjust your timeline for organization. Because I have indisputable proof that women have been a part, have been involved in numismatics, especially in the United States, since 1795. So WIN has a proud history of women contributing, working on behalf of numismatics in many ways. And that's part of my program this morning. So we're going to readjust your history. You might want to put that in there for Katie to do. But back to 1795, who would have thought that women would have had an impact on this hobby and our coins and currency? And this is what it's all about. As I said, I have proof, and also a number of years back, the former editor of Coin World, Margot Russell, talked about some of the real gems in the numismatic hobby. And that happened to be in your area in Houston in 1978. And some of the real gems in the numismatic hobby are women. Now that was at the time in 1978. But what were those gems like prior to that? Well, it seems when the United States was established, and the Treasury Department was established in 1789, and officially got going in the striking of coins and eventually printing of currency later on, that women have played an integral part in numismatics through their efforts in the Treasury Department. And this morning we're going to take that time. We're going to go a little bit back. Our story begins, as I said, in 1795. And lo and behold, women were there at the Philadelphia Mint. Now, except for Cindy and a few others here, let me quit. She knows the answers. I'm shooting. Let me ask you, think about it. 1795. What would you assume the role and duties of a woman would be at the Philadelphia Mint?
Sweeping the floor.
Okay, sweeping the floor, being janitor or custodian. What else? What other thoughts?
Record keeping.
Record keeping, sure, bookkeepers, clerks. Anything else possible? Okay, let's move on. Let's see, and by the way, both your answers are wrong, but that's okay. It's good. You see, this is good. We want to look at it that way. In fact, the earliest records, according to the Treasury Historical Society, 2 females, it says, were hired in early 1795 at the fledgling mint. And we just speculate as to why. Clerks, housekeeping, cooking, whatever. Well, all those are dead wrong. The first 2 women hired at the Philadelphia Mint were Sarah Waldrake and Rachel Summers. And they were employed at the mint as coin adjusters. Now, what's a coin adjuster? Well, they were adjusting the weights of the planchets of our silver and gold coins before they're struck and even after they're struck to make sure they have the proper weight and amount of gold or silver in them. They were hired at the grand salary of 50 cents a week. Why? Because men wouldn't take less than $1.20 for the same job. Unfair, but here we're beginning to look. Here we see the foundations of women coming in. It seems Mint Director Rittenhouse assigned them, the women, the primary task of adjusting not silver coinage, but the gold coinage. Our first $10 coins, eagles, $5. This duty was given to women only. Now again, proves that you spoke up, I'll pick on you. Why would you assume that women would be given the responsibility of taking on the gold rather than the silver? Maybe a little more trustworthy?
I was gonna say honesty is the only thing.
Honesty is part of it, but you would also again be wrong. I'm sorry to pick on you, Prue. That's not. We're trying to learn. This is a learning session, okay?
I would normally say it's because of their hands.
Ah, now you're.
Because women traditionally have better tactile, first of all, they're smaller, better.
Their agility, they're able to do, again, think about it, folks. You ladies too. What do you do with your nails? You file your nails. Well, you're actually filing here a gold coin, right? Mm-hmm. So, and it was much easier. They're more agile, according to David Rittenhouse's record. That's why he had women, because gold was also a softer material.
Yep.
Now, there is some integrity issues because the men probably, since they had the big overalls, would file that gold off. And of course, they didn't shake it off back in those days, so they'd walk home with the gold and silver on it. And the women were given these huge white ruffled dresses, which they wore only in the mint when they were assaying the coins, when they were doing the filing and adjusting. But they left those in the facility. Men, however, were trusted. So you can see the country needed to protect its integrity in gold. And so what did these women give us? Well, if we take a look at the history, we find out that approximately 14,290 $10 gold pieces were issued in 1795. And every one of those went through the hands of a woman. You see, so our first $10 gold pieces may have not been struck by a woman, but they certainly had an impact on their getting out to the public. I'm going to break that down. 14,000, think of how many. No, they did silver too, but they were primarily charged with just the gold. So when you're out on the floor out there, and you see a nice certified or slab gold coin that says file marks on rim, buy it. Why? Because women in numismatics had an effect on that coin. They were part of that coin being issued. And so we find here that the first two women, Sarah Waldrake and Rachel Summers, were there. They left the mint employ, according to records, about 1801. And that was probably due to Mr. Jefferson at the time being a presidential candidate. He did not think women should be qualified to work at the U.S. Mint. So there's different things. So they left employ. And as we begin to look at this, we take a look at the area between 1800 and 1859. And we find that droves of women began to be hired at the Treasury Department, the first of those being at the Customs Department. And Prue, I won't pick on you this time.
Okay,
Thank you. I'm sure you'd appreciate that. But we're getting your name in here as well. I wish you could get Arthur in there, but that's okay. I did it, see? Anyway, they were hired by the Customs Services as nurses, lighthouse keepers, and surveyors in Virginia. Now let me ask a question. What is a surveyor? Now we're thinking, this is U.S. Customs now. What does a surveyor do for the U.S. Customs? Are they mapping out land and landscape area? The surveyor in the Customs Department is not that. They were in charge of incoming vessels to check the cargo lists and quarantine any vessels that had illegal contraband and so forth on it, or those that might be also carrying diseases. Yes?
Did they physically go on to the ship?
Yes, and they physically went onto the ships. And the first woman to do that was in 1841, and her name was Augusta Owen. And she was charged with the first woman to be hired for this specific purpose. And they male heads, I guess at the time, gave her the responsibility of quarantining ships. Some of those carrying all sorts of smallpox and other diseases aboard those ships. They felt women were better protected from these diseases than their male counterparts. It's interesting. And we can see how things, well, that seems to be the rationale. And you women are strong. You outlive us men, don't you? We're around. We find out here that she was the first customs field agent to be employed for that purpose. And what did she bring about? Well, for those of us that collect memorabilia that relates, bills of lading, ship releases, all sorts of custom documents, there are hundreds of them signed by Augusta Owen, the first woman to handle materials for the customs services on quarantined ships. And then we come down to the Civil War time. And we find here that even to the pre-Civil War time, about 1860, we find out there were such financial demands and constraints on the country that men, being off at war, could not handle the various jobs within the fledgling Bureau of Engraving and Printing, which would be established, but to meet the monetary needs of this country. And we find that in 1861, the Treasury Department offered a wide array of jobs for women. Now again, remember the pay scale inadequacies that are there. But for those of you that collect banknotes, here's an area that you're going to enjoy doing. Again, when you go out to that floor, you pick up a nicely centered banknote, we're going to see how that came about. And we're going to see how the counterfeiting came apart, counterfeit detection came apart as well. But when it comes to other things, just before that, the first income tax laws were passed in 1862. And can you possibly guess who the first 8 employees of the Internal Revenue Service were?
Women.
Women in numismatics. Very good. Thank you, Prue. I appreciate that. Women were actually the first 8 individuals hired by the IRS. They were the early clerks. But that's only the tip of the iceberg, the beginning of the story for women's involvement within the Treasury Department itself. But they were hired, and as the war dragged on, more and more men would leave the Treasury Department to be out on the battlefields. Francis Spinner, in April of 1862, requested from Secretary of the Treasury Salmon Chase the authority to hire women to cut treasury notes at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. And his rationale was this, and I quote from his records, because a woman can use scissors, better than them in, will do it faster, and will do it cheaper. I know it's unfortunate, but your history is here. You see what you're giving to our hobby. That's the fun part. Well, I can imagine Mr. Chase thought about it for a while. I don't know about women being here. I don't think it's good. It sets a precedent. It's a bad idea. Well, eventually he did yield to Mr. Spinner. And in May of 1862, a Miss Jeannie Douglas became the first woman hired by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing to cut and ready paper money for circulation. One woman to take on that massive load of cutting and preparing currency for distribution. There were some men there involved, but I can imagine what it was like. And so she was hired and she went to work there. And she was under the scrutiny of men. They were probably working over her shoulder, watching her every bit. And you know, when they were asked to give reports at their monthly meetings or weekly meetings and then get them back to the secretary, Miss Jeannie Douglas proved her sex well. She was simply awesome and amazing at what she could do. Now, what are we talking about here? Well, for those of you that are paper money collectors, you go out there when they have a certified note. What does it say? Equal centering, equally trimmed margins. Can you imagine a woman, or a crew of women, which will happen in a short time, cutting those notes perfectly by scissors, each one? For example, our notes now are on a sheet of 32. Can you imagine one woman cutting 32 notes out, even margining, centering, to get them out into distribution? The perfection that these women were able to do it with. Well, Miss Douglas proved her sex worthy beyond belief. And we collectors are thankful for those centered notes. As a result, in June, an additional 80 women were hired by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing to simply cut and ready notes for circulation. So think of the precedent you women have. And you were there, you've contributed these notes for us as collectors today. But that, again, that's only part of the story. What about counterfeit detection? What about notes that the Bureau of Engraving and Printing shows you out here that are charred, burnt, damaged? Well, women also played a major role, as we'll see this morning, in that operations as well. But as the war went on, all sorts of individuals were handed. And in November, and also again in November of 1862, and meaning no disrespect, the color barrier was first broken by the Department of the Treasury when they employed Sophia Holmes at the Division of Issue as a charwoman. She received the grand salary of $15 a month to incinerate and remove bad currency. And she has a whole story. We don't have much time this morning because I want to focus in on some of the other women's contributions to our hobby as well. But she literally saved the government on one particular occasion almost $2 million in printed notes that were somehow accidentally or somehow found their way into the trash, hidden under a parcel of materials. And for her discovery and for her pointing it out to Spinner, who used to walk the halls of the Treasury building at that time during the Civil War, she was rewarded with a lifetime job. She was raised to what was called at that time chief janitress at a salary of $660 a year. And Aunt Sophia died in 1901, having served the Treasury Department some 37 years in that capacity. So women, you've saved us money. And later on we'll understand why Harry Truman appointed a woman to be the first U.S. Treasurer, because he wanted a woman holding the purse strings of this nation. You women are frugal. You've been great at it. And we thank you for that too. Well, it starts out with filing too. But what about, I talk about something else. And in 1864, shortly towards the end of the Civil War, Mrs. William A. Leonard was hired by Francis Spinner as the department's chief counterfeit detector. And so we find here the precedent. Before that time, men had taken care of the counterfeiting of currency that comes out. It wasn't. We find out that the men had not done a very good job with that. There were a lot of bad notes, a lot of counterfeits in circulation. And when Miss Willard came aboard, or Miss Leonard came aboard, we found that abruptly stopped. She was so good at being able to detect counterfeit greenbacks that the press at the time called her the government's female Sherlock Holmes. It was also quoted and said that in her nearly 40 years with the Treasury Department, that she never made a mistake. A counterfeit never got past her keen eyes. So what does that do for us today? Well, those notes again that are out there for us that collect paper money, those genuine notes were brought to us by Miss Leonard, courtesy of her. That's her contribution as a woman to numismatics. Now we can pay the hundreds and thousands of dollars for those genuine notes out there. We can have them certified. We have them perfectly centered. Look at the whole process. You see, the good notes we have today out there as collectors, we wouldn't have without women being there. Men, they weren't doing so good. So women, you've got a proud heritage as well. We also find out too, any of you were there, besides Arthur and myself, in 1871, when Mrs. O'Leary's fire burned down the town of Chicago. Right? Well, what was also there? There's a Federal Reserve. Well, there was actually a bank depository. Think about all the currency that was charred in that fire. Businesses, banking industries. All that had to be examined. And who was put in charge of that? Well, the woman that was put in charge of that name was Patterson. May not bring you a thing. Let me put down, that was her married name. But her father was President of the United States following Abraham Lincoln. This is Andrew Johnson's daughter. And she headed the female task force to salvage, to record over 100 cases of burned currency, postage stamps for the government. It took them nearly 2 years, and they were all but a couple of dollars in value. Think of the effort these women went through to look through those charred ashes, be able to tell 100 from a 10, from a 50, from 100, whatever they had out there. All the various styles and denominations of currencies came as a result. But women headed up that task force, and the government was able to recoup all but a couple of dollars from 100 cases. That is just, it's just awesome and amazing to think about it. But with the dawning of the 20th century, women began to become more involved in the Treasury Department. The opening of the U.S. Mint at Colorado in 1906 ushered in with it many new precedents for women. Early mint records note several women went to work at the mint for what? Come on, help me out, folks, help me out. They went to work at the mint for what? They were hired as janitors. They were hired to clean. They were hired to cook. They were hired as nurses, cleanup personnel. But we also find one additional notation in those early 1906 records. It says women, several of them, were hired as coin press operators. 1906. Now, as numismatists, think about that possibility. That had been a position previously owned only by men, held by men. And here we have women coming in. Think about the coins that Denver issued or struck over the years. How about those wonderful things, the 16D? Women had a hand in the production of the 16D mercury dime. What are they? How about some of those other key dates? How about that 32D Washington commemorative that actually was a quarter? Women played a major role in its production, its output, its coinage as press operators. And again, we can go on. The 1906D double eagles, those are tough to find. Women had a hand in those first gold coins struck at Denver. But Denver wasn't the only facility. We find that in 1909, the San Francisco Mint followed the Denver precedent when it, quote unquote, magnanimously hired additional press operators, many of these women, to assist in the involvement of the minting of what? What came out? What small coin?
Lincoln cent.
The Lincoln cent. Now, we're talking San Francisco. So what did the Lincoln cent have on it in San Francisco to denote it? Well, as Eva Adams used to say, I like these little letters, the D's and S's. They had a little S on it. But what did it have on the reverse too? That other important letters, right, Arthur? And you know, the WS, the VDB. Who would have ever thought that the 1909 SVDB was a product that came about because of women being involved striking that coin? Can you imagine how it must have been at that time? I wish I was there to see those women striking those 1909 SVDBs, not knowing today they'd be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in value. But women played a role in the striking of that coin and the issuance of that coin. It's phenomenal as we go on. And we find later on, too, that other individuals began to take on more managerial roles, starting in 1910 with Margaret Kelly. She paved the way for the future mint directors. She paved the way for the future U.S. treasurers to be women. She paid for them to be at the various superintendent levels, at the various minting facilities. It was Margaret Kelly. And President Taft had the wisdom to think that women were great. He adored his wife. She got involved in the automobiles, the whole interest, bringing the White House fleet. But here, he had appointed 2 men at Treasury. The number 3 person in 1910 at the Treasury Department was a woman, and that was Margaret V. Kelly. And when the other 2 gentlemen were out of town, and they were always out on business, guess who was the acting mint director? Margaret V. Kelly. First woman to have that position. Later on, we'd go to see people like Nellie Taylor Ross. They would have it for over 20 years. Eva Adams, it's names that we know now as well. Brooks and Stella Hackle and so forth. But here it was paved for the way. The year was 1919. We're going to back up to the Customs Service again, because they were one of the divisions also that hired a lot of women. And in 1919, the Customs Service broke its precedent by hiring the first young woman chemist to work in San Francisco. Anybody have an idea who that might be? First woman chemist hired in 1919. This individual went on to have a long and colorful career within Treasury. She was, I think it was the 27th director of the United States Mint. I'm talking about Miss Eva Adams. But her original job was as a chemist. And what did the chemist do? Well, she was analyzing all the alloys to make the planchards and so forth. So Eva Adams, when she became mint director under President Kennedy, had a precedent, had a knowledge, had an idea of what was going on. When Miss Adams became mint director, think about her tenure as mint director. We're talking in the 1960s, 61. What was happening to our coins? It was a very volatile period in time. What was happening to the metal content? 64, what happened? What was taken out? It went from silver to clad. And whether we like it or not, she was also responsible for giving us what? Those coins without mint marks. But yet she said she loved those little D's and S's on there. She testified to Congress, look at, I love those little D and S's on coins. But yet she took them off the coins. And why did that happen? Because you and I, as men and women collectors, were hoarding those coins with little letters on it. We were keeping them out of circulation. We had them in cases for display. It was our fault there was a coin shortage. And so she had them removed. Well, what did she give us in return? Coins without that, but also the special mint sets. And now you begin to see the contributions as we get down into the 60s, 70s, and 80s of women to this hobby. Women in numismatics. Miss Adams is one of those. She gave us those. But what else did she give us? Year 1964. Headlines, Denver. President Johnson signs bill authorizing legislation for 1964 silver peace dollar. You see, there's still mystery surrounding that coin today. Ms. Adams was the mint director, but the person in charge of the Denver Mint facility was Fern Miller, the 3rd woman to head that facility, first being in 1952. When the legislation was authorized, the mint struck, approximately 317,000 of those silver dollars. They were ready to go. Struck, ready to go, ready to be distributed to the public. And then shortly thereafter, President Johnson rescinded the order calling for those coins to be struck. And so they had to all be melted. Sad to us as collectors. But rumors persisted, didn't they? They still persist today. Some of those silver dollars are out there. Rumor was at the time, according to records from Fern Miller, the superintendent, that she had allowed employees do purchase some of these coins at face value and take them home, which was true. But we also have an affidavit from her that every one of those coins was returned by the employee to the mint and melted. Well, the government was still worried about that. And one of the first meetings was between Fern Miller and Eva Adams. And they had gotten together. Adams says, look, I got to go up to Congress and testify. I got John Sparkman. He's a tough old cookie on the Finance Committee. He's going to question me. She says, will you tell me? She says, I got to swear under oath that all these were melted. The mint superintendent says, we've recovered every coin. Based on that, Ms. Adams went up and testified to Congress. Every single one of those silver dollars was melted. The rest is history. But there's still speculations out there. There are coins said to be here. Never seen one. When you all have one, like the 33 $20 golds that showed up, I'm sure they'll be there as well. I'm checking watch for time. But think about what the women were beginning to give us here. There was all sorts of persistent rumors, and for time's sake, I want to just share a couple of other women with you so we can move on this morning. We've got business to take care of. But as I mentioned earlier, in 1949, Harry Truman was president, of course, and the job opened for a U.S. treasurer. Now, Harry didn't want it just to be a token position. It was never said to be that way, but it was at the beginning, but it ended up being a full-time job to be U.S. treasurer. Harry was thinking, he was given all sorts of advice. These are the good men for it. Harry says, nah, I just can't see a man handling that. He says, you know, a woman would do a better job at holding the purse strings of our nation. And so he appointed Georgia Nessie Clark as the first female treasurer of the United States. And she was called a novelty. She was made fun of. He was always chided. Well, you got a woman loose. She says, yes, but I'd rather have a woman at the purse strings. He says, look what my wife has done to me at home to make us frugal. He says, wouldn't you want the same from you? And he appealed to the wives in the audience. Don't you do the same for your husband? And they said yes. He says, now you know why I appointed her U.S. treasurer. What's interesting, I want to just diverge just a little bit here as we close out, is for those of you that like to collect the currency by the series or issues and so forth, I also like to collect those that are also not only embossed with the treasurer's signature, or you in this case, but also hand signed. And the small notes go back clear to 1929, because we didn't have a woman up until 1949. But it's nice to have their hand signatures. This also has the secretaries on it as well. This is from Ivy Baker Priest, and this is Robert Anderson. But to have these notes autographed, I've got a complete set all the way up. You realize we've had 18 women U.S. treasurers since and not a man has yet, until we'll see what Mr. Obama appoints for his position as well, has been appointed to it. But when you collect these and when you send the materials in for autographing to the Treasury Department, any of you would try it? You got to do it, because they come back in beautiful engraved envelopes such as these. And they're from each U.S. treasurer. I'll take the one here. This is one from Francine Neff during the bicentennial. But they're beautiful cards, and they return your canceled note inside. This one here, she was also in charge of the savings bond division. This was for the bicentennial. 1776, it says you buy a U.S. savings bond, and the $2, the note's out here. But on the outside it does. It says, Treasurer of the United States encloses the autographed money which you requested. Looks like I requested autographed money. Doesn't say I sent it in for autographing. So you want to get free money here, maybe a way. May I ask you in return that you continue to work for us against inflation? There was another win thing at that time. Gerald Ford wrote, whip inflation now. I always got mixed up with your group as well. But help us work against inflation so that money, and all of our money, will remain strong. Signed, Francine Neff, Treasurer of the United States.